Thank you very much, Shangan. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here today and to look out in such a sea of engaged faces. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the topic of nutrition presents a paradox, a fundamental paradox for us. On the one hand, nothing should come as naturally as good nutrition. Like breathing or drinking water or sleeping, it's essential to survival. It should be programmed into everything we do. It shouldn't require a second thought to be well nourished. Our biological and social systems should be designed to deliver that's the most essential function, and just effortlessly. And yet, malnutrition, in one form or another, affects nearly half of the world's population. And we know that hunger and malnutrition have been with us for at least tens of thousands of years, probably longer. Though far from being taken for granted, nutrition occupies the thoughts of hundreds of millions of people every day. And it is a tragic daily obsession for those suffering from acute hunger, where it's not taken for granted at all. Some 805 million people in the world do not have enough food to eat to lead a healthy, active life. That's about 1 in 9 of us. But nutrition is also a daily obsession for millions concerned with obesity and weight loss. In the United States alone, the weight loss industry last year was estimated to be worth $60 billion. It's fueled a long string of packaged diets: Atkins, South Beach, Beverly Hills, Dukan, Paleo, my favorite, Sniff Vanilla, and Paint Your Kitchen Blue. All of these come with breathless and often miraculous claims about transformational change, huge promise. But they go in and out of fashion, even though as they go in and out of fashion, as a nation, we become more and more obese. My own personal daily obsessive thoughts began at the age of 14, when, being in an American high school with a bulging belly and adolescent angst, I decided to follow the Atkins diet for 6 weeks. And that started a lifetime of struggling to manage my own weight through a combination of diet and exercise. And that sometimes worked, but often failed. I'm happy today I'm behind a big lectern, so you can't check. I still live in an obesogenic environment. I still follow an obesogenic lifestyle. Later, as a young adult, I read Francis Moore Lappé's remarkable book, Diet for a Small Planet. That book really moved me. It prompted me to be a vegetarian for 9 years, mainly in an effort to save the planet from the wasteful ravages of industrial meat production. Sadly, my single act of conscience has not stopped climate change, and I'm long back to eating meat. Ladies and gentlemen, individual choices do matter. But as we all know, real and sustainable change has to happen at the level of policy and of systems. And that has been a theme of the Forman lectures for more than 20 years. Change policies, change systems, innovate. And Marty Forman, though I never had the honor of meeting him, advanced that key insight as one of the great champions for better nutrition policy. Looking around this room today, we have row upon row of nutrition champions. And we know a lot about what we need to do to address malnutrition. Looking back on previous lectures, there's an encyclopedia of insight and knowledge on what works, particularly on what works for tackling food insecurity, tackling stunting, wasting, and anemia. And if we focus on undernutrition, we've known for some years what needs to be done. We know the package basically. We know that good health care is essential. We know that there are many factors that are required to make sure mothers and children get the right nutrients at the right time and the right form. We know exclusive breastfeeding, care practices, dietary diversity, all of these things count. We know that agriculture, water, sanitation, hygiene, social protection, all of these have an important role to play. And this package was originally posited in the UNICEF conceptual framework in 1990. It's been reinforced ever since. And I'd say this package was, of course, deeply influenced by the work of Marty Forman. And we know that we have this set of ideas. We also need to know we need to build capacity, evaluate what works, collaborate across the political and the business divide. And again, all of this is familiar territory for those who are regular attendees at Forman lectures. And they're the themes from the back catalog of the Forman lectures. I should say I read all of the Forman lectures I could get my hands on in preparation for this, and I was struck by how many common themes there were in these lectures. But what's really interesting is the way that these themes have come together in a new consensus in recent years. We've seen this in the Lancet series of 2008 and the Lancet series of 2013. We've seen it in the creation of the Scaling Up Nutrition movement and the 2013 Nutrition for Growth commitments, with billions of dollars committed to advance the cause of better nutrition. But nutrition seems to have all of the ingredients for success. We know more, the topic has a higher profile, and we're doing more. But ladies and gentlemen, the plain truth is this, that at the moment, if we're really honest and look in the mirror, our collective efforts are not at the moment adequate to meet the challenge. And that is the horrible truth. Improvement rates in stunting are still slow. Anemia rates remain remarkably high in many places. Millions still suffer from micronutrient deficiencies, and we know how to address those. And acute malnutrition, what the press regards as starvation in various forms. Acute malnutrition still affects 51 million children around the world. 51 million children in the 21st century. And yet, more than 20 years of these lectures have pointed toward what needs to be done. So why have we repeatedly failed to translate that knowledge into the required level of political commitment and practical programming and fundamental change that needs to take place to end malnutrition? What's the reason? Well, inevitably, it's complicated. But one problem, in my view, is that there are still too many one-off piloted and partial programs that address part of the challenge, often for a fixed period of time. They're not necessarily sustainable. And to meet the challenge of undernutrition, in my view, we should reduce the number of ad hoc, isolated, and short-term interventions and replace them with a collective and holistic approach that binds us together with policy, systems, and behavior change. And for today, let's just call this change, let's call it a change in lifestyle. To support this lifestyle change, the solution I offer today is that we should all adopt the data diet. This means changing our ecosystem so that we eat, breathe, and digest the right data at the right time to inform critical decisions. It means real and sustainable change to policies and to systems based on quality data. It means accountability above all else with really good data. It means using our collective knowledge to build capacity, to collaborate across sectors, and to evaluate what works, what really works, not just what we hope works, based on the numbers. So, admittedly, in 2014, data is the new diet craze in international development. Lots of different meetings are talking about it. In May 2013, the UN High-Level Panel on the Post-2015 Development Agenda called for, quote, a new data revolution, unquote. The panel report was, however, a great title, this Data Revolution Call to Action. The panel report was rather fuzzy about exactly what the nature of the revolution would be and precisely what would be required. But it served to agitate with an outpouring of commentaries and seminars and working papers and arguments about how to bring about the data revolution. I think on average I get about one invitation a week to a data revolution event to just try to define what this thing is. And I have to say I confront these invitations with some sense of guilt. I have to hold up my hand in taking some responsibility for this confusion that prevails at the moment. since I was the behind-the-scenes scribbler who coined the phrase data revolution when drafting that report. But I was also content, thinking, well, that's a really good strapline, I was also content to leave the content of the subsequent paragraphs rather vague. I still believe, nevertheless, in the data revolution, and it's happening before our eyes. As data increasingly informs everything we do in business and in government and in our daily lives. Only good data can tell us where the problems are and where the money is going. We know that. Only by investing in data and evidence can we measure the impact of what we do. And it is an obvious truth, but worth repeating, that without measurement, we are guessing. In the development sector, we should be horrified by how little basic data we have about most topics, and how little we know about what is and what isn't working beyond the pilot phase. It's easy to see how we would create a data diet for better nutrition outcomes. I think it's easy anyway. Many of the basic ingredients for the diet have been gathered for years by the World Health Organization, by the Food and Agriculture Organization, by the World Bank, UNICEF, and many others. Organizations like IFPRI have added to that with really good research, but have also contributed some excellent serving suggestions for the diet on how to make the data more digestible. So, for example, I think that the excellent Global Hunger Index, this terrific index, which has done so much in recent years to highlight hidden hunger, is a very digestible meal. Last month, the more ambitious data diet got a big boost with the publication of the first Global Nutrition Report, which I see is in stacks in the lobby out here, for those who don't have one. It was launched at the International Conference on Nutrition in Rome. Now, I'm personally incredibly excited about this report. If you don't have one, you really need one to have by your bedside to peruse. I do find, although I'm keenly interested in nutrition, that sometimes the intensity of the data can be enough to put me to sleep, but it is very, very useful to have on the desk. I'm really excited by this, but I was also really, genuinely shocked by what the authors found about data. First of all, the report reminds us that in most places, good nutrition data just doesn't exist today. At the most basic level, we're not able to assess whether countries are making progress on the 6 targets adopted for nutrition by the World Health Assembly. At the most basic level, these are the basic targets, and we're most places not able to track them. Now, the World Health Assembly didn't help things by framing 2 of the 6 targets in a way that has not yet been possible to assess progress, but minor point. Need to get there. But of the remaining 4 targets, the report says that 40% of the UN member states cannot track more than 2 of those targets. 40% cannot track more than 2. These are the global targets we've all agreed we're going to live by. And most countries, well, not any that I'm aware of, none have set their own national WHO targets. There may be some I'm not aware of. So the link between national and global achievement is really hard to trace. That basic line of sight between the global targets and national and local has not yet been put in place. So to some extent, those of us in the nutrition community are working blind for lack of data on interventions we know that are important to improve nutrition. Take exclusive breastfeeding. Isn't it shocking that we have no idea at all, how many children in Nigeria or India or Ethiopia or Bangladesh are being reached by programs promoting early or exclusive breastfeeding? Huge acknowledged intervention really matters. We ought to be able to track it. How can we know whether these programs are working or even taking place if we don't have the data? We need to measure breastfeeding, but we also need to measure the money. The Global Nutrition Report calls for data identifying and tracking domestic financial resources to nutrition. And we know that nutrition is one of the least well-tracked sectors for financing. Because nutrition is a multi-sectoral concern, this is really challenging. It's been a challenge. Many people in this room have faced it for some time. We've not yet cracked it. We've just started. The Global Nutrition Report points out 3 countries who got to the point that they can track it this well. So the authors of this report, and it really is a terrific report, it sets a new standard. But the authors are not even able to begin to review how much money needs to be mobilized for nutrition for the simple reason that very little is known about what is being spent now. We can't plot an increase if we don't know how much is being spent now. Again, in most places, there's no data. Secondly, this report reminds us that where there is data, what we're consuming is often old, stale, and let's be frank, sometimes useless data. For example, the authors point out that over a third of all the countries studied have not had a survey containing anthropometric data since before 2010. So Lawrence Haddad has asked the question, you wouldn't use 5-year-old data to run your economy, would you? You're not content to use 5-year-old data to run your economy. Why are we content? Why are we content to use old data to make life and death decisions about nutrition programming? We just seem to accept it as if it's not a problem. That's not true. People have raised it as a problem, but it's not moving fast, you know. And as if stale data wasn't bad enough, we also serve ourselves most data in portions which are raw, large, and often difficult to digest. The undigestible data problem is still with us. For example, just imagine for a moment that you're in charge of a local Warada health office in Ethiopia, and you want to know something about the state of nutrition in your particular patch, which you're in charge of. Perhaps you want to use your flexible funding wisely. Perhaps you're just intensely committed to making a difference. But the only data available is for the whole Amhara region. That's you and 107 other Waradas, many of which are fundamentally different from your own. Where does that leave you as a local official? It leaves you with a place where it's impossible to use this data to understand what's really going on in your area. How can you diagnose what needs to be done? And if you work really hard, if you put in long hours, sacrifice family time, put in huge personal effort to make a difference, how do you know if you're making that difference? Some might say, why bother? So we need much more granular data to make decisions at all levels. The Global Nutrition Report describes vividly how much work had to be put into compiling district-level nutrition data for just 11 districts in India. 11 districts. That leaves 665 more districts in India for which the work is yet to be done. Finally, this report reminds us what a bad situation we are in when it comes to linking data to accountability, which is probably the most important thing for achieving action. For example, getting donors to report in a consistent way on what they spent on nutrition. For compiling this report, getting donors to report took months of email exchanges, pleas, entreaties, lobbying, complaining. I have to say my own organization had to be emailed more than once to report our data. So it's a labor-intensive effort. It ought to be entirely straightforward. We really care about this because the Nutrition for Growth Summit, we saw very big pledges for action and money, but we need to be able to track and hold people accountable for, are they delivering what they promised? It's one thing to get together in a big international summit and make grand promises, but it's another thing to track it closely and deliver on it. So, this report has set out a number of data challenges for us. How should we approach that challenge? So I'd like to shift gears. If your mind is still in rural Ethiopia, come away from there. And imagine for the moment that instead of being a room full of nutrition champions, we're a room full of business executives running large and successful companies. So you might want to imagine a big desk, lots of assistants and helpers, and lots of data in front of you. The world's most successful companies are absolutely obsessed with spreadsheets to inform decision making. And why? Well, I mean, it's obvious, I suppose, because profit margins are largely dependent on the right data-driven decisions. The company's share price, its market share, and possibly its very survival are at stake. Capitalism itself is fueled by a diet of data for most firms. So how and why would a data diet help in nutrition? We keep imagining that we're running a company and discussing key performance indicators. I used to run a company, so the key performance indicators are the the bread and butter of what you do in terms of management. As we know, these things, key performance indicators, are vital tools for businesses of every size. Now, how is a key performance indicator different from just other kinds of data? The critical thing about a key performance indicator is that it links data to decisions. A KPI is a data point with a sharp edge. You might say it's a number with attitude. It's all about delivery. And so a KPI is not just about what's going on, it's about what do we need to do next. So how would a business approach nutrition KPIs? Well, one thing a business would do is look at sales. Any company looks at the top line, how much of a product or a service it sells or is moving. Every company monitors sales closely, most on a monthly basis. Many have daily reports or even minute-by-minute data feeds. And when sales rise or they stagnate or fall, then of course, senior management will want to understand why, understand what's going on, and then take action accordingly. Businesses also need to understand as much as possible about their competitors. And all big companies tirelessly track their market share, and they understand the size of their market, how it's changing, and what the dynamics are. Nutrition programs are broadly about delivering goods, services, and behavior change within family homes, to individuals, within communities, and especially for those at risk, such as pregnant women and young children. Now, what if, just imagine, what if all national and provincial nutrition programs were able to map out and segment their target markets? What if we knew with geographically precise information what was going on in terms of nutrition? What if they're able to track how their products and services are being received and used? So I'd like to take, for example, the simple intervention of large-scale food fortification. GAIN, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, has been building programs to promote food fortification for decades. And it's fairly easy. If you're doing food fortification, I suppose a lot of people in this room have been involved in fortification programs. It's fairly easy to know how much oil or flour or salt is being fortified. At the production end, that's pretty straightforward. But until recently, GAIN have had no real data on how much fortified food is actually reaching those in need. They've now developed a tool to assess fortification coverage. And with this, for example, this simple tool, they can see that in Senegal, about 2/3 of women of reproductive age get at least 10% of their reference nutrient intake of iron from fortified flour. It's such a simple metric, but so useful, and until recently, simply not available. Most fortification programs, we know very little about their reach, at least in developing countries, and their coverage. And of course, the next question to understand is how fortified flour fits into the broader diet and whether it's making an actual difference to anemia. So we know that nutrition programs are in desperate need of these simple metrics to track the growth of reach, more importantly, impact. So GAIN is one example. They're in the business of nutrition, but what about looking at sales through another distribution channel? Just again, thinking about having a business mindset for these things. For example, of every 10 women who attend an antenatal clinic, and my organization, we fund a lot of antenatal work because we're concerned about child survival, perinatal survival, how many of the women who attend an antenatal clinic, how many of them actually receive the nutrition interventions that they should do at that point, or could do? Now this is what in business terms, what marketing specialists call converting leads. You've got a lead, someone coming to a clinic, can we get them some additional interventions with nutrition? Coverage of effective nutrition interventions could be transformed if we could track those leads. And what if we track them as obsessively as marketing departments do? I don't know if any of you have worked in a marketing department in a business, but most of them are highly driven by performance bonuses with really strong targets and long hours of obsessive working trying to achieve some of those targets. We could bring that kind of concentration of mind to the social marketing of nutrition interventions. Perhaps we could make a difference. But it's all driven by data, knowing whether the targets are being met. So let's look at another business KPI, customers. The most successful businesses obsess about measuring customer satisfaction. For big retail firms, it's absolutely standard to understand their customers' purchasing practices, preferences, life choices, and increasingly what time they get up in the morning. Governments, on the other hand, are often happy to ignore the fact that their facilities are empty, or that key commodities are out of stock, or that disgruntled customers are looking for better services elsewhere. A lot of government programs are still fairly immune to that information. But we know that creating feedback loops with good data has enormous potential to improve program quality. And we've seen this. Many of you already read the groundbreaking trial of community-based monitoring in Uganda. Very impressive piece of work. We showed just having community monitoring, no additional resources, led to a significant increase in the weight of children under 18 months of age. So no extra money, just tracking closely. Until recently, many nutrition programs have focused too narrowly on supplying new solutions. We've been really interested in products, innovative products, and getting them out there. And that's good. But the complementary foods, the micronutrient powders, and so on, which I believe in, but we've not done enough to pay attention to customer demand. That's beginning to shift. Not yet paid enough attention to customer experience. In contrast, big retail firms understand their customers deeply. They invest deeply in understanding the customer experience. They invest in creative thought and effort to build brands, to shape demand, connect with the emotions and aspirations of those they reach. The best nutrition programs do include social marketing, and we see quite a lot of social marketing. Alan Berg was telling me before this lecture that Marty Forman had been involved in early efforts in social marketing. So it's been around for a while. We know what needs to be done. But are we doing enough to extract the data from the social marketing that is taking place? Do we really use the social marketing information we have to drive decisions on a regular basis? Do we bring that sense of urgency and that sense of jeopardy that you have in the marketing departments of big firms? Really, really data-driven. Now remember, I've asked you to think that you're in a business thinking about key performance indicators. We've talked about sales, we've talked about customers. Let me get a bit more hard-edged now, talk about costs and expenditure. And these, of course, are in a business you track relentlessly. So when I ran my own business, before I got full-time into development, I tracked costs very closely. Well, actually, to be really honest, I had a finance director who tracked the costs very closely. And she would then come and harass me until I would take some action on the costs. But, that was her job. That was in her job description, harass the CEO until something is done. In contrast, most governments have little idea about how the total amount they're spending on nutrition. I mentioned that earlier. And neither governments nor most donors know much about what it has cost to provide essential nutrition services. Good costing data is the natural pairing for robust evidence on impact. At the moment, my guess is that the world spends far too much resource on nutrition initiatives which don't have the wildest chance, not the slightest chance of being cost effective, often because their impact is so low. They don't have a clue what the impact is. Choices about the investments we make are often divorced from cost effectiveness information. And it's just the horrible truth in many programs. So we need better data on cost effectiveness, and we need to drive that data, connect it to decisions we make. Let me turn then to the last of my list of key performance indicators, which businesses track for data-driven decisions, and that is about people. It's about workforce. Nutrition programs tend to not think systematically about the people who deliver services. We think generally about them. We all say there's a capability problem there. We think about it in general terms. But how many staff vacancies is the program carrying? How many hours does it take to train a new agent? What is the daily absenteeism rate? What's the annual agent turnover? How much impact does each agent generate? The truth is that currently, general information about workforce and worker performance is the Achilles heel of most nutrition interventions. I have to say nutrition does not have a monopoly on this problem. It's fairly widely spread. But for nutrition, we're not going to get there until we are much better about who are the people who are delivering the services. Do the workers have the resources they need to deliver? And are they delivering? We must get better about identifying who's supposed to deliver each intervention and track it down, not just to the last mile, but to the last inch to know whether it's actually happening. And if they're doing it now, if they did it last month, are they going to do it again next month? It's basic management information. And I'm not saying that everyone is bad at this, but in general, there's room for all of us to improve very substantially on these kinds of business-led KPIs. So, I've tried to suggest that key performance indicators are a powerful tool for harnessing decisions to data. So not just data for data's sake, and I used to be an academic in a previous life, I love data just for its own sake, but really to link data to delivery. There's a real need for common indicators that work in many levels, from the community to the continent, informing decision makers all along the chain. So it's not enough to generate better data. We need to make that data digestible and put it in a framework for scrutiny. And I have an example. The African Leaders Malaria Alliance is a really good example of linking data to accountability with their ALMA scorecard. And at the highest level, at the level of heads of government, African leaders get together and they jointly review progress in the fight against malaria. And this simple scorecard gives them color-coded, easy to understand information, not only about what's happening with malaria, but what's happening with the various interventions that are necessary to tackle malaria. And it is proven to be an incredibly powerful tool for generating accountability, but also peer pressure. Because if you're all doing this together with a bunch of other heads of government, there are real reasons to try to hold up your side. My hope is that with the Global Nutrition Report, published every year from now on with increasing granularity and clarity, that we'll get a similar set of tools going on nutrition. Without that, we're not going to make progress. It's why, despite a gap of 22 years between international conferences on nutrition, ICN2 endorsed 60 or so recommendations were broadly in the same area as the first ICN. They're not completely identical, but broadly in the same. But we have very little data to show on what has and what has not worked. And it's why 40% of the countries cannot track more than 2 World Health Assembly nutrition targets. And there are some incredibly striking examples of countries that are innovating with data. There's a lot of good stuff going on in pockets. In Rwanda, for example, community health workers already report nutrition data. They already use mobile phones to report nutrition data. And that's been linked to incentives paid by the national government. So they report nutrition data with phones, and there are incentives about pay to their associations. So it's a really good way to link data to accountability and incentives. Next year, that's going to be spread out so that agricultural extension workers in Rwanda will start using a similar system. So the truly joined-up multi-sectoral approach will be possible. It does seem in lectures like this, people often turn to Rwanda for good examples of what's going on. But if it can be done in Rwanda, it can be done elsewhere. So why am I pushing the data diet? Look, despite the title, it's obviously not a single miracle cure for malnutrition. But I believe it could transform the way that we approach these big tasks ahead. To make real progress, I'm calling today that we should commit to a decade of action on nutrition data. And I don't think it should be called a UN General Assembly endorsed decade of action, but it should be a real decade of action. We actually get together for the next decade and commit to doing something serious. The Global Hunger Index and the Global Nutrition Report, both coming out of the IFPRI stable, point the way. We also need data that is linked to decisions. With that particular aim in mind, I would like to propose today 4 specific actions for the nutrition community. I'd like to propose that by this time next year, let's see at least 3 or 4 new pilots for business-like key performance indicators for nutrition programs. Let's start thinking about nutrition programs with strong, hard-edged KPIs. That's first. Second, again by this time next year, I'd like to see that we agree a jointly funded program of work to dramatically improve the availability of coverage data. Coverage data for interventions is so critical. So by this time next year, improve the availability of coverage data at the subnational level in at least 20 countries with a jointly funded program to do so. Third, over the next 3 years, let's get together and help the Rwandas and a handful of other equally enthusiastic countries to pilot systems of real-time nutrition data, which feeds directly to better decisions taken at both the local and the national levels. And last, and I think this is a special one for IFPRI, over the next 3 years, let's eliminate half the data deficits highlighted in this report. There are a lot of them. It's a big job. I think it's possible. There's a lot at stake. We know that undernutrition is the underlying cause of 45% of child deaths. We know that 161 million chronically undernourished children are not getting the right nutrients and health care at the right time. There's real urgency. The human scale of this challenge, and I suppose it's something that Marty Forman understood deeply a long time ago, is the human scale of this challenge is just enormous and is linked to technical and political solutions, but that there's a huge opportunity for us to make more progress now. At the moment, there is real momentum in the global community to address the burdens of malnutrition. And personally, when I was advising Prime Minister Cameron 2 years ago, he was very focused on nutrition. He was very interested in what are the things we need to do about nutrition. At the political level, it really works. People can care about it. But the next 3 years will be a pivotal time for us in the nutrition community. We know there's increased funding. There's some great examples of success. But this moment could fade. It's historically contingent. It's not necessarily going to continue to grow. It's up to us to make sure that this isn't some passing phase. It's up to us to make sure it's not just a fad diet or a passing fashion. So, I say let's embed the data diet with lifestyle and systems change for the next decade so that we substantially improve the data we're using for making decisions. We can do this to transform the world of nutrition and deliver on our promises for the last 20 years or so. We know that with the right nutrition, at the right time, every child has the chance to survive and thrive. And they deserve that. Thank you very much.